What's up guys, Mr. Vane here, bringing you a quick video on this really cool idea I came across the other day called the simulation hypothesis. So here's why we're in a simulation. Basically, the idea that our world is, not as it seems, it's a really old one, but the actual theory or proof that we are actually in a simulation is a pretty new idea, and it's not proof per se. It's more like a demonstration, like a mathematical demonstration. A man named Nick Bostrom, who's a Swedish philosopher, is the man who proposed it. So the idea is that in the future, we predict that we're going to have very, very large amounts of computing power. So large, in fact, that we could do a lot of things that we can't do today. One of those things being we could simulate our world. We could simulate our past and everything that's ever happened and everything that's ever going to happen. And that'll be in the future. We don't know how long in the future, but at some point we could do that. If that is possible, and if we can do that in the future, and let's just assume that it is possible, then we would not only make one simulation of our past, we'd make multiple simulations. We'd make lots of them. Some simulations will be duplicates of our past, and they might be the future's version of history books, where people can go back and look at the events exactly as they happened. Some simulations could be altered in order to see what might have happened had a war gone differently. Either way, there will be a potentially infinite number of simulations, but let's limit it to 1,000,000 for this example. So there will be 1,000,000 simulated U's, but only one original. Now these simulations are going to be perfect. The computing power will allow basically perfect simulation, which begs the question, how would you know if you're a simulation? Well, you can't prove that you are or that you're not. You wouldn't know. If it's a perfect simulation, there's no way to prove one way or the other. But you could predict mathematically whether you were or you weren't. If there were 1,000,000 simulated U's and only one original, then it's 1,000,000 to 1 that you're the original. In all likelihood, you are one of the 1,000,000 simulations. And that's basically what the hypothesis says. Now, there are a couple caveats to the hypothesis. There are basically 3 paths that humans or any civilization can take on their way to creating these simulations, and we'll just call it technological maturity, right? So there's 3 paths you can take on the way there. The first path is as you get close to technological maturity, for some reason, as a civilization, you lose interest in creating these simulations. For some reason, you just don't, the civilization loses interest in creating them. Now, that's one path, in which case we would not be a simulation. We're the original. Now, path number 2 is that as a civilization gets close to technological maturity, they become extinct. They die off. They don't make it there. So while in theory it's possible that we will have immense amounts of computing power in the future, for some reason, as civilizations get close to that amount of computing power, they die. Something happens and they go extinct. Now that's the first two paths, in which case there are no simulations. Now the third path is the one that I've laid out, where people get to technological maturity and they create these simulations, and they're perfect simulations, and there's no way to tell a difference, and there's millions of them, in which case there's 1 million simulated yous and only one original. Now, to kind of shrink the size of this picture, because it's a pretty big picture, I want to give you a quick scenario. And this is actually one that Nick Bostrom, the guy who first thought this up, or first published it and, you know, basically put it out there. This is a scenario that he uses to explain this idea to people. So imagine you wake up in a chair in a room, and there's a table in front of you with a 20-sided die and a cup with a strange liquid in it. And you have to roll that die. If it's a 20, you can get up and leave the room. If it's any other number, 1 through 19, you have to drink that liquid. Now the liquid knocks you out for about an hour, and then you wake up with complete amnesia, and there's a new cup filled exactly as it was before. Now, imagine you're in that scenario. It's you. And you have to predict, before rolling the dice, you have to predict how many times you've drank the liquid. How many times you've rolled a 1 through 19. Now, imagine you predict, well, I haven't been here before. I don't remember this. So I'm going to predict this is the first time I've been in this scenario. And you roll the dice, and let's say you get a 10. You drink the liquid. You pass out. You wake back up. Exact same scenario. Now you're going to guess that you're the first again, because you don't remember guessing before. Now, how do you prove which number you are? How do you prove how many times you've drank the liquid? You can't. If you have total amnesia, there's no way for you to prove which number you are. Now, you could predict mathematically how likely you are to be one of the numbers. That's the simulation hypothesis. It uses math to predict likelihood. It's not proof of anything. But in the die scenario where you roll the 20-sided die, the odds that you are the very first one to roll that dice are 1 in 20. Right? It's the odds that you roll a 20. Not great odds. Not great odds at all. And depending on how many simulations there are, that's the odds that you're the first one. That you are an original you. So in all reality, you're probably not an original. And that's why we're in a simulation.